Hey, my friends, I'm Matt. This is the 10-Minute Bible Hour podcast, and today we're going right through the front door, or maybe Kool-Aid Manning right through the drywall, as it were, into this discussion about what's going on in Matthew chapter 16 and two competing interpretations that have had a whole lot to do with especially the last 500 or 600 years of church history, but it's a debate that really goes back all the way to the beginning of church history, and that is, what is Jesus actually saying to Peter after Peter rightly identifies him as the Christ? So here's a passage we're looking at, Matthew 16:13. We've covered it a lot the last few days, but you're getting it again. It says, when Jesus came to the region of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, "Hey, who do people say the Son of Man is?" And they replied, "Some say John the Baptist, others say Elijah, and still others Jeremiah or one of the prophets." "But what about you?" he asked. "Who do you say that I am?" Simon Peter answered, "You're the Christ, the Son of the living God." And Jesus replied, "Blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah, for this was not revealed to you by man, but by my Father in heaven. And I tell you that you're Peter, and on this rock I'll build my church, and the gates of Hades won't overcome it. I'll give you the keys to the kingdom of heaven, and whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven." Historically, two positions on this. Both parties agree that Peter's confession of Jesus is right. He is the Christ, the Messiah. Where the divergence of the two positions occurs is in what Jesus means related to what he says about Peter and how things are going to work out next. So the non-Catholic crowd will look at this passage, and some will say the thing on which Jesus is going to build his church is the confession that Peter made, that he's not referring to Peter himself. Some other Protestants will look at that and say, no, he's probably referring to Peter, but we just don't agree with where Catholics take it. So position number one is there's nothing entirely unique about Peter, and Peter as an individual is not being conferred some kind of authority from Jesus here to make decisions and to ultimately determine the direction of church. Position number one, adherents would say that all of the apostles, and indeed any committed Christian in a way, carries the banner of this confession, and the binding and loosing has to do with the power of the gospel to affect other people, and the authority of Christians, the authority of the church who are following Jesus rightly to correct stuff that is weird or broken, an idea that gets expanded upon in Matthew chapter 18, a couple chapters later, which is the only other place that I know of where Jesus uses the word church himself. The Catholic position is that no, there is something really unique being handed off to Peter here, that Jesus is singling out Peter, that Jesus is saying, you, Peter, are the person on whom I am going to build this church. You are going to be vested with unique authority, spiritual authority. You are going to be, in a way, like a lesser human go-between between the things of the spiritual and eternal and the things of the temporal and the earthly. And the Catholic position is that Peter is effectively the first pope. He dies in Rome, and Catholic tradition would say that Peter handed off this authority that he received here in Matthew 16 to other leaders of the church in Rome, that Rome then becomes effectively the seat of the headquarters of Christianity, and that each and every pope since, I think, we'd still have to acknowledge that that line got busted up and broken, and there were competing papacies. For a time there was a version of the Pope that was in France, and popes excommunicated other popes. I think everybody on all sides acknowledges that the historical neatness and lineage of what Catholics would say is descended from Peter is not perfectly tidy. So acknowledging it's a little bit complicated, the Catholic position would still be, even with all of the ups and downs and bumps and bruises and weird stuff, God has preserved his church, and that initial conference of authority that we get from Jesus to Peter in chapter 16 isn't just handed on from one guy, Peter, to the next guy, to the next guy, to the next guy in terms of the Bishop of Rome or the Pope, but there's a whole hierarchy, and that Peter was able to confer lesser authority on lesser agents of the church, and so clergy and all of the different ranks of the church hierarchy are all born out of this conferring of authority. And in essence, the sacrament of ordination is handed off to Peter in this passage. This is a wild simplification of all of it, but that sets the stage. So why does it matter if Peter is the guy or if the apostles in general are the guy. Well, the stakes are pretty high. So much of Catholic theology and how the whole thing is played out, ecclesiology, that is church structure, is predicated on the assumption that Peter here receives a unique conference of authority, not one equal with the other apostles, but unique and ahead of the other apostles. And because Catholic theology is so very heavily dependent on sacramentalism, that being these 7 sacraments of the church, where grace is conferred from God to people, well, for Catholic theology, it's very important that the person administering that is actually someone who's a right representative of the church. And so that needs to be traceable back to Peter in one way or another. And if you're someone who's a Catholic, you're like, well, yeah, what's weird about that? How is this hard? And if you're somebody who's not, you're like, that doesn't make any sense to me. And so for my friends who are coming into this argument for the first time, this really is a Rorschach test. If Catholic assumptions make sense, you look at this ink blot and you're like, well, obviously that's what Jesus is saying. Only a crazy person wouldn't read it that way. And if you're coming at this with not Catholic assumptions, you're like, whoa, no, that's not entirely exclusive there. I mean, what about the entire Greek church or Eastern church or people who followed the other apostles or all the apostles? No, it can't mean that so simply. So let's just try to break down the raw materials and see what we can get to. And ultimately, the end game of this little conversation today is not going to be me making the final decision on how you need to read this or what it is, but I will disclose to you what I've disclosed all along. I'm a Protestant, and one of the main reasons I'm a Protestant is that I do feel a degree of uncertainty about the Catholic claims of apostolic succession and the exclusivity of that. And I could be wrong. Of course I could be wrong. I've been wrong about a bunch of other stuff before. My point in telling you that is not to put a flag in the ground and be like, if you want to be on my side, you need to think this. My point is just to disclose my biases so you can take that stuff into account as you think about important things for yourself and land wherever it is that you want to land. So first off, in verse 17, Jesus' reply begins with, "Blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah, for this was not revealed to you by man, but by my Father in heaven." So I see 2 things going on there. One, there is some contention historically that right here, Jesus is giving Simon a new name because he goes on to say, "And I tell you that you are Peter." But Matthew is referring to him as Simon Peter far earlier in the text. Rather, a little closer look at the Greek, Hebrew, and Aramaic expressions of Peter's name indicates that this is all kind of the same thing. And there is a little bit of a play on words here with the idea of the rock. I mean, Peter, Petra, petrified. You've heard of Petra, the rock city that's in Jordan, just across the way from where all of this stuff was happening. So I can say with relative certainty that this is not a Saul to Paul situation like we get in Acts, or Jacob having his name changed, or Abram to Abraham. It looks like we've just got a name that serves multiple purposes for illustrating Jesus' point and this play on words about a rock. I don't think Peter is getting some brand new name here and brand new commissioning. That does not mean that the Protestants are right or the Catholics are right or the Orthodox are right. It's just an observation about the text. So first of all, we see Jesus drawing on a whole bunch of different expressions of Peter's name to make a play on words happen here that I think would have made a ton more sense in the original language, but is still discernible by us today. The second thing I see going on is that he's saying, "Blessed are you for getting this thing right." Now the question is Jesus uniquely conferring authority on Peter by saying that? Or, and the biases are all coming through here, so remember to take it into account, or is this in keeping with the kind of blessing that we see the text confer on people who really understood the uniqueness of the moment with Jesus ahead of the game? Jesus praises the faith of the Gentile centurion and the Gentile Canaanite woman earlier in the book of Matthew. Why are they blessed? Why did they receive this blessing? Why is their faith praised? Because they saw something early in the game. And they were able to do the math and say, I am going to take a great social risk here and cast my lot and throw in with this Jesus who most people are too afraid to throw in with or to publicly pronounce what they make of him. I'm going to do it. So again, it looks like at least part of the equation for that blessing is the early adopter cred. Additionally, you've got some other women who don't care how silly they look, they're going to run up to Jesus and they're going to pour out expensive perfume, and people are going to grumble, that's not a good use of money. They're going to blow off doing the dishes and getting the food ready because they just want to sit with Jesus. And people are critical of these women, but Jesus is like, they get it. They understand the uniqueness of the moment. They understand that the King, the Christ, the Messiah is right here with you right now, and that's only going to last for a moment. So he confers a unique blessing, a unique affirmation on all of these people for getting it when the popular sentiment was to not get it, because they understood in the moment how unique this thing was. And that's an undercurrent in the Gospels that is often missed. We can't help but think of the Gospels from the perspective of people who are reading it a couple thousand years after the fact. So it just kind of slides by us when we come to all those points where Jesus is like, no, like right now, 29 AD is awesome. This is like the awesomest year of all the years ever because I'm here. And the people who got that seem to be very praiseworthy. I hate to do this to you, my friends. This is such an abrupt pause, but there's way too much here to unpack in one episode. I'm just going to interrupt myself right here. We're going to pause the thing and pick it up tomorrow right where we left off. I'm Matt. This is the 10-Minute Bible Hour podcast, and I look forward to doing this again soon.